When I was growing up, one of my favorite games was Half-Life 1.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel. The time is 8.
Half-Life 1 did something very special that it's kind of hard to put into words.
Estimated high of 105. The Black Mesa compound is maintained at a pleasant...
In Half-Life, you play as Gordon Freeman, a scientist going to work at Black Mesa. The opening tram ride is such an iconic opener and really just completely sets the pace that the rest of the game sort of has. Starting off on this tram going through this facility, you're pretty much given a tour of what just day-to-day life is in Black Mesa. It's such a remarkable way to put you really in the shoes of Gordon Freeman. You're introduced to so much so quick without any dialogue, the only dialogue being sort of the announcer that you hear above you.
And board a high security train. If you have not yet submitted...
And the amazing thing about Half-Life is that it never takes the control away from you. You're always sort of in control of your perspective, and you have the freedom to look around and really absorb sort of the place that you're about to be in for the rest of the game. And I think something that it begins to establish very well right from the get-go is the industrial aesthetic that I sort of want to talk about. I think when I think of industrial, I really think of sort of mechanical environments, I think of machinery, urban environments, I think of factories, facilities, I think of a darker, more grotesque sort of style. It's not too blunt, it's not too in your face. I think as much as style is a part of it, I think another part of it is the nature of it and the way it's delivered. I think industrial is a very subtle style when done very well. I think subtlety is super important. I think even going a step further would be to say that being understated is the way that this industrial aesthetic, this industrial element that Half-Life really achieves, really operates. I don't think it really ever says too much or elaborates too much. It sort of lets you just sort of experience it. It doesn't too much to elaborate on what it's doing. You just sort of experience it yourself.
Very good. We'll take it from here. Power to stage 1 emitters in 3, 2, 1. Time to see predictable phase arrays.
Upon getting to the laboratory, you start this experiment. Things very quickly go wrong. A resonance cascade occurs, which essentially tears a portal into an alien world, which causes all these aliens and these different species to sort of pour into Black Mesa, overrunning this facility. We're knocked unconscious until we come to, and we figure out that we need to get out of Black Mesa, get to the surface, and try to get help. The military are sent in, sort of what you're told, to help the situation, help you get out. Eventually you realize the military were sent in just to wipe the whole facility clean, killing off any scientists, any aliens, pretty much just containing the entire incident, wiping out anyone in their way, including you. And so you're going up against aliens, you're going up against the military, you're going up against pretty much everything and anything that gets in your way in terms of getting out of Black Mesa. Black Mesa very, very quickly turns into a shithole. I cannot even underestimate how much of a tragedy that the Black Mesa incident is. In terms of video games having like tragic incidents, Half-Life 1 is up there. Black Mesa is a fucking tragedy. The industrial aesthetic has been done so many times over the years from games like Fallout, BioShock, kind of took it more of a retro direction, maybe more of a steampunk kind of attitude, but I think the industrial spirit was still there that you could feel in games like Half-Life. In recent years, you can see newer games that will take on the industrial aesthetic. However, I think you look at games like Cyberpunk 2077. I recently went through Amnesia: Machine for Pigs, which is more steampunk, and I was not really a big fan of the steampunk aesthetic. It's really more rooted in like the 40s and the 50s sort of aesthetic. But steampunk never did it for me, and cyberpunk never did it for me. Cyberpunk being different from steampunk. Cyberpunk being more sort of sterile, techno, very digitized, very EDM, very techno, that kind of attitude, very much like a new age type deal. Steampunk and cyberpunk didn't quite achieve the same essence that I'm trying to point at here, that Half-Life embodied so well, and probably embodies the best looking back now as an adult than any of the other games that I played. This was a style very of its time, but I think Half-Life 1 just embodies it the best. I think what Half-Life 1 achieves isn't so much an aesthetic. I think it's more of an element, and I think really the word I want to use is element, you know, the industrial element of Half-Life. Aesthetic is more visual appeal, it's more just kind of, it almost feels trite to me. The word can kind of feel trite. It can feel trite. It isn't always trite. The thing I'm trying to point at here, I think the word element really captures it better. It is visual, but it is also, it's a mood, it's mental, it's sort of a mental state, it's a feeling. There's a solemnness to Half-Life when playing it that it sort of achieves, that goes into this industrial sort of vibe that I keep bringing up. It's an element, it's a mood, it's a feeling that it manages to evoke that I think Half-Life 1 just does very in a unique way that many others tried to do, but I don't think quite captured the niche that Half-Life 1 was capable of achieving. There really was something about going through these facilities, going through labs, abandoned office spaces, elevator shafts, giant test rooms, halls with creatures in them, and then suddenly you go outside, and it's just such a contrast. The sky is so blue, the canyons have that orange tint to it. I will never forget scaling the side of that mountain when you first sort of experience the outside, the giant sort of landscape that you're staring out at as you scale this cliffside. And just the Valve theme that plays in the background. It is such a distinct moment that lives in my mind after all these years. Every time I went back and replayed it, that was always a moment that I looked forward to. There's a maturity to Half-Life that it has sort of in the way that it just carries itself out. I don't think it ever plays anything up. Even when the stakes are higher, it always feels grounded. It never feels sort of above you. It sort of just presents it for what it is. And I always loved that delivery. And I think the other side of that is sort of a sense of humility. It's sort of in this element, again, alongside maturity. I think there's a loneliness, running through all these hallways, running through all these areas. You're really the only person sort of taking up any power. I think of the office complex section, these dark corridors where, there's electric wires hanging out. You're watching all these scientists meet their fate. You're facing all these aliens, and you're just going through all these once populated sort of office spaces by yourself, occasionally running into a guard, occasionally running into a scientist. But at large, you're going through all this by yourself, entering these giant facilities, and it's just these massive spaces that you're completely by yourself in. It just creates this sense of isolation. You're just really by yourself in Half-Life. And I think that loneliness, I think that sort of individuality is such a big part of this element. It's sort of this blend of subtlety, of maturity, humility, of sort of a solemn mood in loneliness. That was how Half-Life delivered itself. That was how it delivered the narrative. That was how it paced itself. That's how it established the vibe, the atmosphere. It just kind of let you do it. There was something in all the sci-fi weapons that you pick up, especially later on in the game, once you start picking up the alien technology that you were researching as you get closer and closer to the Lambda core. It was just built on just how crazy and imaginative that it all was, and that even though it was so stoic, it still had so much heart to it, and it was so tangible, it was so distinct. I think another thing about the industrial style is just that it doesn't have to be realistic, and it isn't realistic. Looking at another game that sort of embodies this element, I look at Final Fantasy VII. And although Final Fantasy VII does embody maybe a different style, maybe a different aesthetic, there's that word aesthetic again. But what Final Fantasy VII does share is the element that Half-Life has. I think Midgar, it feels like such a lonely place. I think it's in the maturity that it carries itself, the specificity of the points that it sort of gets across, the locations, the actions that you take, the activities you partake in. It just strikes that note, and I think it carries the same element that Half-Life does have. It doesn't have to be realistic, but it does feel like it could be lived in. It somehow feels relatable. It somehow feels like something you want to live in, you want to explore. I think that's something that industrial element sort of embodies. Feels human, it feels relatable, even though it's not human. It's mechanical. It's reflecting a very mechanical style, a very mechanical feel. There's a very natural feel to the industrial aesthetic that I'm sort of trying to point to here. And I also think that sound design is equally as important. I mean, the machinery, the sound of machinery, the sound of factories, the sounds of science fiction, sound effects, You think about the fact that there are alien weapons in these video games, and the sound designers have to invent what that sounds like, because unlike a real gun, there's no real reference for that. A shotgun sounds like a shotgun. An alien gun can sound like whatever the hell they want it to sound like. Sound design is equally as important. Just atmosphere, ambient noises, sounds of vehicles, whether realistic or not realistic. I think the music is equally as much part of Half-Life as is the art style or sort of the game design. I think Kelly Bailey's soundtrack is one of my favorites. I think there's just some timeless video game music and just timeless pieces of ambient music. I think if you're a fan of ambient music, this soundtrack I strongly recommend. One of my favorite tracks of all time is Electric Guitar Ambience, which features just this really gorgeous guitar feedback ringing out, mixed in with all these other atmospheric synths, and it really just sort of sets the vibe, and it really is just the definitive piece from Half-Life that's also reused in Half-Life 2 as well. A lot of the tracks from Half-Life 1 were reused in Half-Life 2 as well. And the soundtrack really does such a great job in uplifting the industrial atmosphere, the sounds of the factory, and not just in music, also in the sound design. I think of just the sounds of the factories that you're running through, the sounds of the laboratories, sounds of machines and beeping and elevators and speakers fizzing out and sounds of light fixtures going out. It all just does a great job in enhancing that mechanical attitude that it sort of is aiming to achieve. I think when I think of what I'm trying to point at here, an element, this industrial element, I think Half-Life just checks all the boxes for me. The element that it sort of conjured, in a way. The element that it evoked was just such a special product of its time that I still feel stands so tall today.